Ukrainian intelligence chief injured in missile attack. According to an official, the head of a Ukrainian intelligence service was hospitalized and is now in Germany for treatment of his injuries. Kirill Budanov, head of the main intelligence directorate, GUR, of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, was wounded during a Russian missile strike against the GUR headquarters in Kiev. An official told Sputnik, on May 29, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that a massive missile strike had been launched against Ukrainian airfields, command posts, and radar posts. The next day, Ilya Kiva, a former deputy of the Supreme Rada, Ukraine's parliament, said that the intelligence services headquarters had been destroyed. According to information received by the Russian security services from GUR sources in Ukraine, it became known that Kirill Budanov was wounded during a Russian attack on the morning of May 29 against the GUR building located on Rybalsky Island in Kiev. A Russian missile flew into the office next. To Budanov's office, the source said. According to the source, Budanov was pulled out of the rubble and then evacuated by helicopter to the military base in Rzeszów, Poland. From there, he says, the senior Ukrainian official was taken to Berlin by an S-21-84, 87 of the 86th Air Medical Evacuation Squadron of the U.S. Air Force, a plane specially made for the case that departed from Ramstein Air Base, Germany. The flight was also recorded in the data of the Flightradar 24 portal. According to him, the plane carrying Budanov took off a few hours earlier, but the video does not make it clear when it was recorded. Kiev denied reports circulating of Budanov's death, but would not comment on his injuries, where he was or what condition he was in. Ukrainian military intelligence sources also now indicate that the head of the GUR is now in serious condition. Kirill Budanov has not been seen in public since the day of the attack. At 3:20 p.m. on May 29, he threatened Moscow with a swift response to missile attacks. One more news. Brazil has assets frozen in Equatorial Guinea, and son of investigated president provokes. Lesson: son of the Guinean, Ecuadorian head of state is accused of money laundering and acquisition of goods with money derived from corruption. However, in his analysis, the African country's decision is a lesson for Brazil. After a sequence of operations by the federal police against Teodoro Obiang Nguema, son of the president of Equatorial Guinea, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, the country decided to retaliate against Brazil and decree the freezing of assets and bank accounts of 3 Brazilian contractors working in Ecuadorian Guinea territory. Mangui is being investigated for money laundering, concealment of assets, and alleged illicit purchase of property. He has already suffered sanctions and convictions in the United Kingdom, the United States, and France on the charge that he paid for cars, real estate, and clothes with money from corruption in his country. The companies, namely ARG, Zagope, and Oase, are from the construction sector, an area in which the presence of the Brazilian private sector has grown in Equatorial Guinea. Folha de Sector has grown in Equatopalo, claims that it tried to contact the contractors but did not receive a response. The Idamarati, on the other hand, told the media that the government follows the decisions of the Guinean, Ecuadorian justice with concern, and that they ignore the fact that the confiscated goods are foreign to the state, since they are private. In the court decision that decreed the freezing of Brazilian companies, shared by Manghim himself on social networks, a judge of first instance claims that it is necessary to compensate damages and losses caused by Brazil to Equatorial Guinea. The president's son, considered number 2 in his father's government, who has been in power for 44 years, raised the tone with Brazil. The only thing that the government and the Brazilian justice system managed to do was harm themselves. We hope that the decision is a lesson so that, in the future, they will know how to measure the consequences of their actions, he wrote. In 2007, the operation of FEF Luxury Living Vida de Luxo, in the translation, in reference to a hashtag commonly used by Hmong aimed at alleged money laundering in the purchase of an apartment in a prime area of São Paulo. In 2018, under Operation Safe Conduct, the investigation also focused on other goods, possibly of illicit origin, seized with Mang in the same year at Viracopos Airport in Campinas, when it concealed goods from customs. In all, 1.4 million in cash and 20 luxury watches valued at as 15.4 million were found on him. In December of last year, a transnational operation to investigate possible money laundering committed by the president's son was launched. Search and seizure warrants were carried out through PF cooperation in France, Portugal, and Switzerland, reports the media. One more news. Lula to ministers. It will be forbidden to have new ideas in the government. It is to fulfill what was proposed. During a meeting with ministers in Brasilia, the president emphasized that the only new proposals he will accept will be in the area of education and announced investment in a mathematics college in Rio de Janeiro. In his third ministerial meeting since the beginning of the government, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva pressed his assistants to improve relations with Congress and said that this Thursday's meeting begins the second step of the government. This meeting presupposes the second step of the government. So far, we have been dealing with the organization of the ministry. We have been dealing with the fight over the budget, trying to recover part of all the public policies dismantled in the government, including reassembling some policies, said the quoted representative. By the newspaper O Globo. At the same time, the president highlighted that it remains to launch the programs Luz para Todos and Agua para Todos, but that, from now on, the government's idea phase is over, and what has already been proposed will have to be put on paper. From now on, we will be prohibited from having new ideas. We will have to fulfill what we have been able to propose so far. The only thing that can change is the creation of schools. Every time a person asks schools, I'm going to say that we are going to do it. Camilo say that we are going to do it. Camilo Santana is prepared to do new things that were not foreseen in his budget, said Lula, addressing the Minister of Education. Lula also announced that the government will invest in a mathematics faculty in the city of Rio de Janeiro. The project will be aimed at award-winning students in the area. About Brasilia, the representative, according to the media, will demand that the ministers respond quickly to the demands of parliamentarians. He will also say that when the Minister of Institutional Relations, Alexandra Padilha, presents a political nomination to a colleague, he is speaking on his behalf. The president is trying to give Padilha more power at a time when the person responsible for the government's political articulation is contested by leaders of the chamber. At the meeting, which is still taking place in the Planalto at this moment and should last until the end of the afternoon, all ministers will have space of up to 10 minutes to present the accomplishments of their ministries. One more news. EU member states trained 24,000 Ukrainian servicemen, says Borrell. The head of the European Union's foreign affairs disclosed the number of Ukrainian military already trained in the bloc's countries and said that it will continue to grow. European Union countries have trained around 24,000 Ukrainian servicemen, and the number will continue to rise. According to Joseph Borrell, head of foreign affairs for the European Union, EU. We continue to support Ukraine. About 24,000 Ukrainian servicemen have been trained in European countries, and that number will continue to increase, guaranteed on Thursday Borrell during a meeting of NATO defense ministers. He said the West must provide Ukraine with more modern weapons. There is a need to increase support and provide more modern weapons. We launched the initiative on ammunition, drones and artillery, Borrell said. He added that the EU is considering signing contracts with military companies in July to buy weapons through the European Defense Agency. Russia has been conducting a special military operation in Ukraine since February 24 last year. According to Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, the objective is the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. One more news. Brazil resurfaces as a great partner of China and becomes a key piece in Mercosur, says analyst. After Uruguay distanced itself from a bilateral agreement with China, Brazil and Argentina once again assumed the role of Beijing's biggest partners in the regional bloc. In an interview with Sputnik, political scientist Nicolas Pose highlighted that Brazil has once again become a key part of Mercosur. For the specialist, China's position of not negotiating only with Uruguay was a foreseeable scenario, beyond the efforts of the Uruguayan government to negotiate bilaterally. It was evident that this would require a more consistent framework that would depend on the favorable position of the largest members of Mercosur, or at least of Brazil, he pointed out. After not being successful in its political onslaught, Uruguay may suffer an eventual political cost, giving way for Brazil to assume once and for all the role of key player in the bloc. The specialist also considered that the return of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva may have influenced the Chinese interest in bilaterally negotiating an agreement with the Uruguayans. According to the specialist, by preferring to respect the Mercosur policy of joint negotiation instead of negotiating directly with the Uruguayans, China shows that it privileges the political relationship with the larger partners, which indicates that Brazil has recovered a more significant position in the system regional, returning to be a key piece. The direction of the trade policy in particular, and of the foreign policy adopted by Brazil, without a doubt, ends up being very important for all the members of the bloc, particularly for smaller countries, as may be the case of Uruguay or Paraguay, he stated. Pose believes that Mercosur and China could advance in sectoral agreements, more limited, that allow certain advances in the trade relationship. Finally, he recalled that Mercosur countries are rehearsing their own bilateral negotiations with China on various issues, noting that recently, the Argentine government signed an agreement that allows the import of products from China without the use of American dollar,